Chapter 12. Houses of Parliament. Monday the 28th of May, 2463. To plunder, to slaughter, to steal, these things they misname empire, and where they make a wilderness, they call it peace. Tacitus, 56-117. B was efficient, very efficient. She was never one to put off until tomorrow what she could do today. Once back in her office, she placed the business card on her desk and started up her 400-year-old computer, another of James's refurbs. She entered Lawrence Brubaker into the database of over 7 million names of those who had died in 2071. She was nonplussed to find out that it was not there. This was not altogether surprising. The database she knew was approximately 15% incomplete. London, in the late 21st century, had been a busy and fluid place, and after all, Lawrence Brubaker had apparently arrived that day. Nevertheless, she persisted, trying it under various other combinations, including spellings: L. Brubaker, Larry Brubaker, Lawrence Brubaker, Brubaker, Brubaker. Still no luck. James stuck his head round the corner. "Turn up for the books?" "Certainly was," she replied, not looking up from her screen. "Doctor looked chuffed." "But he deserves a bit of luck," she said, still staring ahead. "He's under pressure." He continued lingering in the doorway. She sensed he was fishing. "So, do you think he'll stay?" he asked eventually. She looked at him irritated. "And why shouldn't he? He bloody well started all this off." "Sorry, just asking." He paused. "Gossip he's going to be ditched." She tossed down the chewed pencil she'd been twiddling between her fingers. "I know what the gossip is. As far as I'm concerned, he's still the director. And if he is to be ditched, as you put it well, then it's going to be a sad day, and for all of us." James nodded. He was weighing up his options. If the doctor was to go, then perhaps he ought to be putting feelers out to whoever was going to replace him. Some Chinese name had been suggested. Despite the isolation and boredom of living in this desolation, he needed to keep his job. But if he had to go, would anyone miss the apple snares? "Just asking," he said. "Just asking," snorted B. She was fiercely loyal to Lyle, but liked James all the same. He was a good technician, and although she was only 5 years older than him, she treated him as a boy. "Just make yourself busy," she said. "I'm picking them up after lunch." Then nodding at his shoes, she added, "And they could do with a clean, too." He got the hint and sensibly withdrew. B then looked up the Vivimus Foundation. It was based in Bhutan, but had lodges all over the world. Created in the late 21st century, it was a spin-off from the great Vivimus Corporation and was now more commonly known as just the Foundation. It was known to be a rich, secretive and paternalistic body, which wielded huge influence by distributing charity and largesse from the legacy of its benefactor, Sanjay Dutt. Indeed, it indirectly funded the London Restoration Project through the World Archaeological Council. She had never previously tried to communicate with it and could find no particular individual or department to address her query. In the end, she decided to address her telegram simply to info@Vivimus Foundation, Bhutan, and hoped she might get a response in the next couple of months. From experience, she knew that governmental and quasi-governmental bodies worked at a geological speed. Like James, she was also grateful she worked for Lyle. Years ago, they had briefly been lovers. He had been kind to her after the death of her fiancé, which had brought on a miscarriage, but it was the doctor who had cooled it off. In any case, there was always a turnover of young archaeology students coming through London for her to choose from. She had also had a brief but passionate affair with another woman, a researcher from FLAS, the Federation of Latin American States. She too was pondering over her prospects if she was forced to leave. They were grim. By 13, both of her parents were dead, and she went to live with her uncle who had later raped her. But B was nothing if not feisty. One night she had beaten the bastard unconscious and then set his house on fire. She left without knowing or caring whether he had died in the blaze or not, changed her name, and by various circumstances joined the doctor on his first dig 12 years ago. Now the prospect of working on some farm or factory filled her with gloom. She knew she was too independent to marry some dullard of a farmhand. "Something will turn up," she told herself. "It has to." She looked at the time. Better grab a quick bite and get ready to collect the visitors. She stroked the cat slinking between her legs and set about composing the telegram. Dear Sirs, recently party of archaeologists recovered case from Piccadilly Metro, stop. Contents belong to one Lawrence Brubaker, stop. Employed as President Vivimus Corp, R&D Longevity Div, stop. Name not listed as missing London 2071, stop. Please could you pass us prof and personal info ray the above, stop. Request keep contents for research and museum, stop. Faithfully, Dr. Lal Jain, stop. Director London Restoration Project, stop. Palace Westminster, stop. London, stop. James meandered down the corridor into the kitchen. There he found Miguel, the senior engineer, helping himself to some rolls, all part of the refreshments prepared for the afternoon. Didn't have time for breakfast, he said, excusing himself. Doing the final touches for my talk this afternoon on the acceleration of rust. Now what could be more fascinating, chuckled James, helping himself to some sandwiches and cold meats. Grunted Miguel, acknowledging the sarcasm. Are you coming to the presentation or banquet? Nah. Got kit to fix and I couldn't bear to hang around all those Chinese patronizing us. James felt sidelined that he had not been invited by the doctor. Know what you mean. He returned to his den, plate piled high. As he closed the door, a chicken drumstick rolled off onto the floor. Cursed through a mouthful of food. Perching his plate on top of some manuals, he scooped it up, scraping off the fluff, and munched cheerfully through it. He was glad to be on his own. It had been an anxious and busy week, and while he had been out, the uninvited crow had had the good sense to fly away. He reflected on the rumours about the doctor. He wasn't surprised. He was old school, too much the gentleman. Even he could recognize that the doctor appeared an anachronism, out of touch. Why did he always insist on greeting people by the shaking of hands, a habit which sensibly went out when infections were culling swathes of humanity? Why was he dressed in that ridiculous costume this morning? He should have stayed at Lucknow University instead of trying to run this place. Times were changing and the doctor wasn't keeping up with them. Of course everyone liked him, but that wasn't the point. It was always going to be difficult for someone as absorbed in the past as he was to have an eye on the future. Everyone, except him, knew that the project had been painfully slow and more of the city was falling down each year. Only the previous September, much of Richmond had been consumed by fire caused by a lightning strike. The doctor had ignored incessant warnings to erect lightning conductors on high buildings. Now the engineers were scurrying around putting them up, all rather too late. He got back to his work and busied himself for the next couple of hours by cleaning the mud and dirt out of various pieces of kit. He looked at the time. Sod it, he thought. No one's going to miss me if I don't turn up to meet these delegates.